Okay, so this is a typical neighborhood in Saskatoon, Canada, which is basically a mini Calgary. We're gonna take a look at the housing market that's now existent in Canada. We'll just talk briefly about certain issues in the housing market. Now, this is a typical house. We'll take a look right now at a typical house that's being built in the market in Canada. This house is roughly priced in the market, I would say around $600,000 or possibly more, actually, given that it's in a really good neighborhood, 2-story with a developed basement, so probably it's closer to $700,000. It's a typical medium-sized house for a typical middle-class people. Now, I want to mention that this house is right now being bought by an immigrant family, probably from India or Pakistan, younger family in their early 30s, I would say. And they're being sucked into this type of a $700,000 mortgage, given the current interest rates. We could estimate what the mortgage payments would be. Now, typically the mortgage payment for that would roughly be around $3,500, and on top of that, obviously, we have to add property taxes, which are roughly, I would say, around $5,000 for a house like this a year. So if you put another $500 a month as property taxes, just with the mortgage and property taxes, you're looking at least $4,000 for a house like this in Canada right now, in a cheap city like Saskatoon, to own. So the family that's buying this, as I mentioned already, is an immigrant family. Now, these people have no idea what they're basically getting themselves into. They're just being lured with the facade and the look of the housing market and the physical look of the houses themselves, and they assume that they're in a prospering country, that they will always be able to increase their wages and pay more, unbeknownst to them that wages are not increasing in Canada at the pace that you would need to actually not stay back, given the increase in taxes. Specifically, property taxes are going up in Canada wide, are going up. In Toronto, we know it's going up at least 10%, if not 16%. And given the big increases in property taxes alone, and we're not even going to look at the utility increases that will impact the housing like this, we can see that people are getting themselves into a long-term debt slavery, that they're not going to be able to cover it with their current employment. Now, a lot of these people, yes, they do have good jobs, good wages. A lot of them, customers that end up buying this type of houses are usually doctors, or they work in certain areas like that, and they do have decent income. But given the high increases in property taxes, they don't have the full perspective of what's happening in Canada. Now, property taxes increase in Canada without you agreeing to those increases. Even if you try to argue against let's say the property tax being increased on your house because they value your house at $700,000, the city has values that they assess themselves. And if you even don't agree with that, if you think your house is assessed too high, let's say if you think it's worth $650,000, but the city assessment is at $700,000, off of which they base their property taxes, well, you can have an argument against the city, but you have to go make an application, special application in order to be even heard. Now, I want to let people know, especially immigrants that are coming to Canada, that it's not free to have that application looked at the city. Even if you want your property taxes of your house reassessed, you have to pay for that. So there is actual fees on top of fees that are gonna surround you once you put yourself in the Canadian market. There will be red tape everywhere. Let's say if you want to convert that basement of this house into a rental, you will go through a lot of red tape. By the time you're done, you're paying to so many levels of bureaucracy that even the money that you end up making renting this, the money that you end up making from your work might start being not enough to cover the expenses. So the system is built basically in Canada, in the housing market, to eat away at the financial, to eat away at the customer's financial bank account basically. This is the real system in Canada regarding the housing. At every level, there are gatekeepers. Now, the way the structure of the housing market has been worked out in Canada is there are gatekeepers at every level. Now, you have the banks that are loaning mortgages to the consumers. You have home builders that are basically, they're almost the only ones that can build houses. So you have the government, which is a corporation, and the city, which is a corporation that has basically sole authority to sell land to home builders. Basically, we have a monopoly at the lending level from the banks. We have monopoly at the ownership level of the land, and we have monopoly when it comes to building the houses, because there are so many levels of bureaucratic red tape in Canada to be able to build a house. I'm not talking about purchasing the lot. I'm talking about at least if you even have a lot to start building a house. There is so many levels of red tape that by the time you're done, you might not even finish building a house, or you might not even start. That's the current reality in Canada as far as this one basic need that every human being has a right to a house is so monopolized that it's making a lot of people, basically a house is out of reach for a lot of people in Canada. So that's why we're seeing a lot of renters. We're seeing a lot of renting right now, high levels of rent. And people that do end up buying and getting into one of these houses, they are putting themselves into long-term debt slavery. For 25 years or more, they will be paying for a house like this every year. Property taxes will be going up on the house. It's just put in the system. It's part of the system and the structure of the system for taxes to go up every year. It's going to continually go up. And eventually, once you do end up in 30 years selling this house, more than likely you will have to sell it to be able to retire or to go on somewhere else. Once you sell this house, what happens is the bank turns around and lends more money to another consumer that comes and settles in here, and then that consumer starts the 30-year payment to the bank again. So this means we have this house that's gonna be used at least 2-3 times over its lifetime or more to have the bank make money from people living in here. So it's more looking like that this is not an ownership of a house. It more looks like a subscription. So if you don't subscribe and pay for it for 30 years, and then end up selling it to the next subscriber, the next consumer, which is going to stay here for 30 years, pay for it, turn around, sell it, and give it to the next consumer. Every single consumer that ends up buying this house will have to loan money from the bank. That's just the way the structure of the system is set up in Canada. So every single house that we see here is basically bank owned. Although the title is different, but the bank has an interest in the house. And if the title owner doesn't pay for it, it gets taken away. The bank at every level makes money. They have gatekeepers at every other level as far as land ownership goes, buying and selling the lots. There's gatekeepers for that as well. You can't just easily go and buy land from somebody in town. More than likely, they will refuse to sell you land. It is at a point right now that whole neighborhoods in this city are being monopolized, and all the lots are being built by just a few builders, meaning you have no choice. If you want a house, you have to go to those builders. And the builders have monopoly, the banks have monopoly, the government with the corporations in Canada, they have monopoly over land sales. So the consumers have no choice but to give in to this scheme, which basically eats away at every level of your income. It eats away at your right of having a house that you can call it truly your house. But you tell me, when the house is being taxed at such high rates, when you have to continually make high amounts of payments due to bureaucratic red tape, due to monopoly on land sales, due to these factors, the price of this house has gone up so high that most people are locked out of the housing market, and the few that can get into the market and buy a house are actually gonna be debt slaves. Or in layman's term, they're gonna be house broke. This is the current structure of the Canadian market. This is an insider look. I've been in this market now for a while, and this is an insider look at the market. And whoever is interested in buying a house in Canada, they need to take this facts into perspective before they make any type of decision, because a house in Canada truly is not truly your house. It's only a house, as I said, it's a subscription. You subscribe to use it for X amounts of time, versus a lot of these immigrants now that are throttling and just running into Canada thinking that they're going into this paradise. They don't understand the full reality of the Canadian housing market. Thanks for watching.